Good morning, tutors, and welcome to our first tutor workshop in 2026. My name is Tabang Serolela. I am a manager in the Office of the Registrar, and I'm responsible for intern portfolio of evidence. So we just want to welcome you and to thank you for making time to be with us today. The workshop is basically intended to guide you on how to support your interns, and we hope you are going to gather as much information as you could so that the journey with your intern could be an easy one. I am, or maybe let me say, the workshop is divided into two sessions. So the first session will be facilitated by assessor and moderator were Mr. Ibrahim Hussein and Professor Nelaveni Badayachi. So they will be taking you through portfolio of evidence. What are things that you need to look at when you're supporting the interns, and which areas could make your intern not successful. And then after their presentation, we will have a short break. And then from there, we will come to the second session wherein we will be navigating the CPD platform just to make sure that you know where to go. And there are house rules that are displayed there on the screen. Let's follow them. I will just read them loud just to make sure that we are all getting them. The first one, it says to ask questions, please use Q&A function on Teams or the comment section if you are joining us on YouTube. And the session is 3 hours. Please stay with us until the end to get all the information firsthand. Towards the end of the workshop, will be requested to complete a survey to confirm your attendance and rate the workshop. And lastly, the presentation will be available on the website after the second workshop on the 12th of February 2026. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Professor Nelaveni Padayachi. Take us.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Tabang. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Good, Prof.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. We're really delighted to have you here. So this is the Tutor Training Workshop for 2026. As you can see, the outline of the presentation this morning is introductions and resources that we are going to cover in terms of what resources you require as a tutor, what are CPDs, the role of a tutor, administrative information, and portfolio of evidence, which entails the CPD cycle. Some of the important resources that you would need to have access to as a tutor is available on the webpage, on the South African Pharmacy Council webpage, but also you'll see it in the intern tutor manual. At the onset, I want to emphasize how important it is to have the intern tutor manual with you at all times when you are assisting your intern. It really literally is the Bible of information in terms of having a successful intern at the end of the year. So the reference material that is available is on page 25 to 26 of the manual. But also remember the recent board notice has now included various other resources that you can also view on the webpage on the board notice site. I'm not going to go through each of the reference material information. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them already. So, in terms of the competence and what a portfolio of evidence, we know that the competence in the portfolio of evidence is a precursor towards becoming a pharmacist. So, basically, what is the competency areas that you need to ensure that your intern has in order to become a successful pharmacist? It encompasses the continuous professional development, which is the CPD cyclical process that we're all familiar with. It is important for pharmacist interns to fulfill the portfolio of evidence process because um, essentially, in order to be a successful pharmacist, we know that you must align with the 10-star pharmacist principles. The World Health Model, as you can see on the picture on the left, has all of these various principles of what a 10-star pharmacist should be. And it essentially is being a teacher, an entrepreneur, team player, manager, researcher, leader, caregiver, communicator, decision maker, and lifelong learner. So, how do we align all of these World Health Organization principles to becoming this 10-star pharmacist? And this is the role that you should play as a tutor in order to ensure that we have pharmacists in the future that are really competent. To ensure competence in practice, promote lifelong learning, develop the intern's professional skills, enhance the intern's career prospects, support their regulatory compliance and understanding, build confidence, encourage ethical practice, and prepare them for future challenges. As a tutor, it's really a really important role, as I mentioned already, because you are essentially developing future pharmacists. So the three core principles around what a tutor should encompass, or the roles of a tutor, is a mentor, a coach, and a role model. So how do tutors shape their academic and personal growth? So the first one is being a mentor, and you can see from the picture, mentoring really is encompasses various aspects, which involves training, motivation, providing advice to your intern, showing them what success looks like and how they can achieve that success, direction, giving them clear direction, coaching them constantly because it is a tough year to come from undergrad straight into the work environment. So guiding them through the process would be a core component of being a tutor, and then offering support to them and giving them guidance on what their goals are and what they should achieve within that year of being being an intern, and of course training and that I've mentioned earlier as well. In terms of coaching, so focusing on skill building and problem solving. So how are you assisting them to become critical thinkers, future pharmacists that think beyond just theoretical practice, beyond the theory and include critical thinking, encourage persistence and monitoring progress, helping interns achieve measurable outcomes. So making sure that um, whatever tasks that they are given are actually measurable outcomes where they can see how they've grown or progressed over that period of time. Role model demonstrates professionalism. So you yourself need to showcase how professional you are in terms of the way you conduct yourself within the pharmacy that you're working at. Ethical practice and integrity, of course. Inspire interns by setting an example, showing how to handle challenges and achieving your goals, playing a role as no intern is likely to succeed without a tutor who is competent, knowledgeable, gives guidance, is interactive, empathetic, and supportive. So essentially, these three principles really speak to each other and rely on each other to ensure that you as a tutor shape the academic and personal growth of your intern. What do you need as a tutor? So tutors need to be responsible for educating and training the new graduate, provide the pharmacist intern with the required equipment, materials, resources, be it textbooks, Wi-Fi in order to access any information online, programs, and access to information systems and literature as necessary. Provide guidance on the performance of day-to-day tasks and aid in the development of an independent, responsible decision maker on matters affecting the health of the public. What are the benefits of being a tutor? And thank you for being a tutor. Supporting the future of the pharmacy profession, diversifying skills, strengthening pharmacy practice, maintaining knowledge, potential for future recruitment of a newly qualified pharmacist. So essentially, you may be training somebody who may take over your business or work with you in whichever area that you are practicing in. Just to recap, essentially, this is your role to learn, to share your experience, to develop, succeed, and become a true lifelong learner. So this slide here is really just targeted at public sector. And the reason we put this in because we know that public sector hospitals generally have or usually have many satellite pharmacies within an institution. So this came straight out of the tutor manual, and you can find the intern tutor manual, and you can find this within the manual. But what it says that, what are the tips in terms of if you have an intern that is rotating? So there must be at least one approved tutor to be responsible for the effective practical training of that intern. An approved tutor may not delegate his supervisory roles or responsibilities to a community service pharmacist. The facilities or hospital pharmacies where the intern will be rotating must be approved and recorded by council, and each facility must have a pharmacist to supervise that intern. The facility where such rotation would take place for the purposes of practical training, the periods that such services would be provided, as well as the name of the pharmacist under whose supervision the intern would work, must be clearly indicated or described in the contract to be approved by council before that internship begins. And the rotation must be for the purposes of practical training only. So if you need to remember this, as I said, it is in the manual, in the tutor manual, intern manual. The legislative requirements. So no person may commence an internship unless they are registered with the Pharmacy Council as a pharmacist intern. A contract has been entered into between the tutor and the prospective pharmacist intern at the pharmacy or institution registered as a provider of a qualification in pharmacy, academic institution at which the internship will take place. So we all know that interns can also do an academic internship where they pursue their masters. And the tutor and the practical training premises has been approved by Pharmacy Council. So in order to conduct training within any institution, you need to ensure that that site has been approved by council. Registration of a tutor, I'm sure you're all familiar with it because you are a tutor already, I hope. Council shall apply the following criteria for the registration of a tutor. A pharmacist must submit a duly completed application form as approved and provided by Pharmacy Council, pay the tutor registration fee as determined by council, and pay the annual tutor fee as directed by council. A pharmacist who complies with the tutor registration requirements will be registered as a tutor. So I'm sure you're familiar with the many changes that has happened over the past year or so. So just make sure you familiarize yourself with the new legislation. So as an intern, what forms would your interns require? So there's an application for cessation of contract of internship in terms of the Pharmacy Act, which is available online. Declaration of the 400 hours of practical training by interns. These are specific to academic interns. So if they work in a research institution like a university, or if they're part of a manufacturing pharmacy or a wholesale pharmacy. So they need to complete their 400 hours within a pharmacy. Progress reports, which must be completed or reviewed by the tutor online. And an application for registration as a pharmacist with a qualification in pharmacy obtained from within the Republic in terms of the Pharmacy Act, which is also completed online. Overall, the requirements as an intern, they need to ensure, in order to complete the year, that they have successfully completed the pre-reg examination. They are successful in 6 of the portfolio of entry requirements. And we'll go through that if you're not familiar with the portfolio of evidence entries. Completed 365 practical training days, and the tutor submitted all of the required progress reports through the year. And we will give you the timelines in which that needs to happen. What are the portfolio of evidence requirements for the intern, we'll go into detail in the next few slides, but just to give you an overview. So there are 6 domains within the competency standards, and you'll see that in the intern manual. But of these competency standards, we need 6 portfolio entries from each of the domains. Sorry, the 6 domains, not 6 competency standards. So there's 6 domains. Each domain has multiple competency standards, and the intern has to choose one competency standard from each domain. And then 5.3 is the only domain which has a compulsory domain, which is the ethical and legal practice, which is 5.3. So they need to select one, as I said, fulfill at least 75% of those behaviors associated with the competency standard that they've chosen. And competency standard 6.3 is recommended for academic interns only. A fee of 327 Rand is charged on submission of the 10th and subsequent portfolio of entries. So if the intern is failing consistently on the 10th submission of the 10th one, they will have to, and subsequent ones, they have to pay a fee. So these are the deadlines. Make sure that the intern is aware of the deadlines, and also use the tutor in order to verify with whatever submissions that they have provided. And give yourself some time to be able to go through all of those submissions to ensure that the quality of whatever they're submitting is optimum. So we would suggest that you ensure that you cover or have a few days in order to read through all of their entries before it's submitted. And the interns are familiar with the dates as well. What are the implications of not meeting the submission or verification deadlines for the portfolio of evidence entries? So delayed assessment of the portfolio of evidence. So if they miss the deadline, it doesn't come within the cycle of marking, and then they'll have to move forward to the next cycle, which delays them, delays the release of results, ineligibility or delayed or late booking penalties in terms of the pre-reg exam. So they won't be able to fulfill the pre-reg requirements in terms of the dates that they need to meet. Remember, there's a requirement in order for them to write the pre-reg exam. Delayed in the commencement of the community service. We have a lot of interns who don't pass and end up not pursuing their community service in the beginning of January, purely because they haven't fulfilled the requirements of the portfolio of evidence submissions. And that means they extend their internship period, which really comes with multiple problems thereafter for them. Qualifying for the pre-reg exam. I'm sure you're all familiar with the pre-reg exam that they are required to write. So submission of the portfolio of evidence entries to qualify for admission into the pre-reg exams. So please take note of the portfolio of evidence submission dates, which I've just showed you for exam purposes. So in order to fulfill the exam requirements, you need to fulfill all of those portfolio of evidence submission dates or meet those requirements or deadlines. Interns are encouraged to ensure that they submit their portfolio of evidence entries and succeed in them within the normal portfolio evidence submission cycle. Avoid submitting portfolio of evidence entries after the normal portfolio of evidence submission deadlines, as this will attract a late booking fee for the pre-reg exam. And these are the deadline dates or the dates for submission in order for your intern to qualify for the exams for 2026. And this is available in the intern manual, the 2026 manual. Progress reports that I've mentioned earlier as well are also time dependent. So you'll see the first report is due within the first 12 weeks of the intern beginning, followed by the 24 weeks for the second report. The third report is 36 weeks, and then the fourth report is 45 weeks. And there's requirements for all of them. In terms of the academic interns, so at the completion of the 400 hours of practical training in a community or institutional pharmacy, the supervising pharmacist within that facility must sign them off and provide feedback and assist them during that process as well. So all of that needs to happen even with academic interns, or if they're working in a manufacturing or a wholesale site. So please make a note that all review or completion of or submission of reports, progress reports are all done online. So they must be accessed by the tutor on the secure site of the Pharmacy Council website under the My Profile tab, which you'll see on the landing page, I think it is, or if you go into Tutor, um, and it says tutor or supervising pharmacist, and then you'll see the progress report there. Just ensure that you familiarize yourself with the web page in order to make this process easy for you. Just to recap, so portfolio of evidence for pharmacist interns is based on the 2018 competency standards for pharmacists in South Africa. They describe what a newly qualified pharmacist must be capable of at entry level to practice within their scope to meet the patient needs. The framework consists of 6 domains, and each with various competency standards. And within those various competency standards, we have behavioral statements. And I'll show you now what it looks like. So again, I'm sure you're familiar with what a CPD is. So continuing professional development, which we all need to fulfill as pharmacists, is the process by which a registered person maintains and enhances their competence throughout their professional careers, encompasses a range of activities, including continuing education and supplementary training. It enables registered persons to develop in their area of practice and demonstrate competence. So this is the structure of um, what a CPD entails. So you'll see domains, as I said, there's 6 domains. Then each of those domains will have various competency standards, and the competency standards range from maybe 5 within a domain up to maybe 6 to 8 within a domain. So it varies depending on which domain it is. And then within these competency standards, you have behavioral statements. These are the 6 domains that are part of the CPD. The first one, domain 1, is public health. Domain 2 is safe and rational use of medicines and medical devices. Domain 3 is supply of medicines and medical devices. Domain 4, organizational and management skills. Domain 5, which is your compulsory 5.3 domain. Domain 5, where we have competency standard 5.3, professional and personal practice, as being your compulsory one. And then your last domain is domain 6, which is education, critical analysis, and research. So domains are organized as clusters of competencies. If you want to have a look at it, you'll see, again, it's all in the manual, and it's quite easy to maneuver through. So the competency standards are part of a domain, as I've said. How does the domain apply to you? So it really gives you a brief introduction, and I always encourage interns to read through that introduction because it gives them insight into what that domain entails and how they can maneuver through it in terms of where they work. So be it within a community pharmacy institution, wholesale, manufacturing, if they understand and they grasp what the domain means, then they can locate which most likely which competency standard will most likely align to which sector they work in. So it becomes easier for them when they're actually selecting it. So ensure that your interns familiarize themselves with that domain and yourself as well. Competencies, behavioral statements, entry level, intermediate practice, advanced practice, assessment tick box. So that's the structure of the competency standard, which you'll see in the intern manual. So this is what the competency framework looks like. And we chose 5.3 because that's the compulsory one. So the domain is domain 5. And as I said, it has a nice introduction that gives you background. 5.3 is ethical and legal practice. So the name itself suggests to you exactly what that competency standard is going to entail. And I'll get into detail as to what usually interns provide to us. But that essentially means looking at all of the ethical and legal practices within a pharmacy environment. Within that domain and that competency standard, you'll see behavioral statements. Now, your behavioral statements are A, B, C, D, etc. You could have just one behavioral statement within a competency standard, or you could have up to 12 behavioral statements within a competency standard. And it doesn't mean that if you choose, or if the intern chooses a single behavioral statement, that it's easier. Usually it's the most difficult to achieve because it's just so much of depth within that one behavioral statement. So don't let them mislead themselves by thinking that just having one behavioral statement within a competency standard is an easy way out. This is what it looks like, structure of a competency standard. So you'll see domain 5, professional and personal practice. It gives you a description of how does this, or does it apply to me? Does the standard apply to me within that sector? And this particular one is compulsory. So everybody has to do it, and that involves professional, legal, and ethical practices. And then it gives you the introduction and the capability and outcomes. And 5.3, you'll see, is the competency standard, which is ethical and legal practice. And then followed by that, you'll see the behavioral statements from A to E. So the behavioral statements here are what the intern has to fulfill. And remember, earlier on, I mentioned that they need to fulfill at least 75% of these behavioral statements. In order to be competent or deemed competent. And this applies also to the evidence, the number of evidence linked to these behavioral statements. So they need to have at least 75 pieces of evidence that relate to those behavioral statements. So in terms of the behavioral statements, the first one there is applying the Pharmacy Act and Medicines and Related Substance Act and any other applicable legislation in daily practice. So it depends on what scenario they've chosen. And they have to show that scenario, how is it linked to those various legislation that I've mentioned? Then that scenario that they've presented with as well, they have to relate it to, in terms of the scope of practice of a pharmacist, recognizing own limitations of personal competency and expertise, keeping abreast of legislation and applying relevant amendments, complying with professional indemnity requirements, practicing and adhering to the obligations of a pharmacist in terms of the principles of the statutory code of conduct for pharmacists. So the intern has to really interrogate each of the behavioral statements and ensure that they show competency. I mean, that's essentially what we're trying to achieve here, is that the intern shows to us as assessors and moderators that they are deemed competent to be able to apply the Pharmacy Act and the Medicines Related Substance Act. One of the things that we find often is that interns don't provide the most latest legislation, they provide us old legislation. For example, the scope of practice has changed recently, which is, I think it was last year. And we find a lot of interns submitting very old scope of practice. So these are the things that we would like you as tutors to be aware of and just to double check and also make them aware that legislation does change. They need to be aware of all of the changes on the Pharmacy Council website, which is available with all the latest changes with board notices, etc. So keeping abreast is really important. So one of the things that we as interns, as assessors and moderators, we're always concerned about the quality of work that interns provide. So we want to just highlight how important it is that you as the tutor ensure that whatever information they provide to us is of the highest quality. We are producing professionals and we would like them to behave in a professional way. So quality is core to professional behavior. If you look at the intern manual, it says, if the tutor is not pleased with the authenticity of the evidence and the quality of the intern's portfolio of evidence entry, he or she may, after discussing with the intern, return the affected portfolio of evidence entry to the intern to make the necessary corrections and submit it again for verification. So it's really, it's core that you verify and have a look at what the quality is like and whether it fulfills all of the competency standard and behavioral statement requirements and the 75% evidence submission as well. So have a checklist. We thought maybe just to guide you on the process of how you would check quality is potentially to have a checklist to evaluate quality. So in terms of relevance, are the learning activities aligned with the intern's role and goals? Appraisal, is there evidence of relevant knowledge and skill acquired? The outcomes, are the outcomes specific, measurable, and linked to professional improvement? Completeness, does the submission follow the required format and address all the required sections? So to gain an in-depth understanding of the portfolio of evidence process for interns, provide constructive feedback. So if you provide them sufficient constructive feedback, then it really makes it easier and for us as assessors and moderators in order to ensure that they ease through the process and they are able to pass it at the first attempt. Request evidence and check for confidentiality. So we do see interns submitting information that where the confidentiality is not maintained. For example, a label that may have the patient's details. We often see Schedule 6 registers that have patient details as well. Calculation errors is a common one. So when they do a compounding mixture or if they do bulk um, compounding or extemporaneous, whatever calculation that is required, even if they're calculating on a script for a particular item, we sometimes see errors and we would like the tutors to please double check those calculations because once they breach confidentiality and if the calculations are incorrect, that particular piece of evidence is deemed as failed and then the intern fails that entire submission. Legislation relevance, I mean, it's imperative that interns understand what the current legislation is. In order to practice, they need to know that legislation changes all the time and keep abreast of it. So providing false or old, not false, but old legislation will deem them as incompetent. Plagiarism, we do see cases of plagiarism where they would copy information from previous submissions of other people, other interns who may have given them their information. And remember, we all assessors and moderators who have been doing this for a while. So we do pick up information. And a lot of us are academics as well. So we do see submissions of interns who submit information from their undergraduate years. So we see falsified evidence a lot where interns are now using AI generated pictures and AI generated evidence to and submit that as information. And it's quite easy to pick up when it's falsified. So please, can you just pay attention to that information when they submit? Suggest to them further areas of further learning. So where could they improve? What are the gaps in their learning? And maybe that could be potentially their next submission. Provide post-submission support. So once their submission has gone through, encourage them or discuss the feedback, encourage them to do a self-assessment, promote iteration, maintaining quality assurance by comparing submissions. So if you have two interns and you're lucky enough to have two interns within your environment, potentially ask them to compare submissions and to see where the gaps are in terms of what they've submitted, and maybe one has passed and the other hasn't. So it's really good to have that peer-reviewed process as well, and then audit regularly to ensure quality. And most importantly, I mean, this is really a lot to take in, and we know that you are very busy as pharmacists, but have fun in the process of tutoring. Make the learning continuous with the intern and not regimented. So what are the requirements? So one from each domain, as I said, there's 6 domains in total. 5.3 is compulsory. Encourage interns not to submit all six entries at once, because remember, there's a formative and summative approach to the CPDs, where the initial 3 or 4 should really be the formative assessment, which lays the foundation to understand what the expectations are for each of the entries that they've submitted. So once they understand, the next 2 become easier, the next 3 or 4 becomes easier once they understand exactly what an assessor and moderator requires. Encourage them to have sufficient time throughout the year to prepare for those assessments. This will increase their chances of success as you would obtain feedback from the assessor and the moderator, as I've said. Make sure that they read the behavioral statements really carefully and understand what is expected. If they have, if a competency standard has 1 to 3 behavioral statements, evidence is needed for all the statements. So they need to provide 100% evidence if it's just A, B, and C behavioral statements within a competency. If that particular competency standard has 4 behavioral statements and more, So if it is has A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., then they would have to submit 75, at least 75% of evidence to fulfill that competency standard. Now, 75% is the requirement, but it doesn't mean that the intern can't submit 100%. We are happy to receive 100% evidence, but the 75% is the minimum. And always consult the intern tutor manual. As I said, it's the Bible. It's what we use when we assess all our interns as well. Every portfolio of evidence entry must reflect the intern's individual work, so no group activities are accepted for any of the exercises. I'm sure everybody's familiar with these 4 steps. We do it on an annual basis. So the first step is your reflection of the CPD cycle. So reflection really is to decide, and as the word states, to reflect as an intern, why are they choosing this particular competency standard, and what was their gaps, and what was the learning trigger? What triggered them to be able to say, okay, this is the area that I need to work on, or this is an area I need to improve on? Or maybe I've never done this before and I don't remember learning about it in my undergraduate year, and I need to know and understand what it's all about. So the first step within the reflection part is the learning title. So the learning title really is a snapshot or gives us a summary as the assessor and moderator. So what is this particular CPD going to entail? It should be relevant to what you want to learn, so what the intern wants to learn, and be related to that competency standard that they've chosen. It should describe what they are intending to do. Don't simply copy the wording of the competency standard. So we see a lot of the times interns will copy exactly what the competency standard says or describes and puts that into their learning title. So we don't want to see that. Once we see that, it becomes immediately not yet competent. The learning title must be unique and describe your case study. So your role as a tutor, what does it entail when it comes to the reflection component? So on the left is the marking grid. So that's the grid that we would use, and that's also available in the intern manual, where it really is something, it's an essential tool that would be or could be used to guide the intern to ensure success. So that's the grid we use when we are marking as assessors and moderators. So if we look at the grid, under the learning title, it's either 0 or a 1. So they could either fail it completely or pass that. So what we expect when we're seeing the learning title, we want it to be original, descriptive, and related to the competency standard. And then the learning need. So the learning need you'll see is ranged from 0 to 3. And in order to be fully competent, which is 3, there must be a clear learning need. So we want to be able to see, so what really does the intern want to learn from this particular competency standard and those associated behaviors? And we need to see both the trigger scenario. So what triggered it? Was it because they didn't know how to fill in a Schedule 6 register, for example, or maybe in a wholesale practice, they didn't know that there was a specified Schedule 5 register that needed to be completed, for example. So what was the trigger scenario? What happened that triggered them to say that they are not yet competent in that particular area? And then they need to indicate what the intern hopes to achieve after completing this competency standard. So once they've completed it, what are they hoping? Are they hoping now to be better prepared to fill out a Schedule 6 register, for example, and to understand the quarterly balancing, for example? So that's what we use to, and those are the core key principles that we look at when we are assessing and moderating. So how can you help? So is it their own learning need? Check if it is really their own learning need. Is it something you think that that's a massive gap within their training in that year? What reflective prompts can you provide to help interns think critically? How can you create a safe space for open discussion about their growth? Are you modeling good reflective practices yourself? Are you actively assisting the intern to identify relevant learning needs? So during practice and you guiding them, you could identify certain gaps for them and they could align that to the competency standards. Practical steps, ask them open-ended questions to deepen the learner's reflections. Use examples from your own CPD journey to inspire learners. Encourage a growth mindset by focusing on progress and future potential. This is also in the manual. It's a quick checklist and also a great tool in order to help the intern to navigate through each of the steps and to see, have they completed it? Is it something that they've done? And it's, yeah, as I said, it's a great tool. It really helps them to get all of the checklist components correct and helps us to mark it easier. The next step is your planning process. As the name states, in terms of the planning section, so how are they going to do? How are they going to plan this idea of whatever they want to achieve that they've just mentioned in the reflection component? They need to explain to the assessor and moderator a clear description of what the plan is. So how exactly am I going to learn this? What resources am I going to use in order to achieve that particular competency standard? So what are the options? They link their behavioral statements and structure planning accordingly, mention relevant current resources to be used. So this is really important, core to the planning section, where often what we find is interns will submit a detailed plan where they'll say, I'm going to use the GPP in order to fulfill this particular competency standard. But they don't tell us exactly where. The GPP is a massive document. Where would they look for the information? Where would we find the information? And this allows us as the assessor and moderator to identify whether the learner or the intern is actually looking at the critical areas in order to ensure that they are deemed competent. So we want to be able to see page numbers, chapters. If it's the act, we want to know which part of the act. Is it 22A? Is it 22C, for example? Is it a regulation or is it part of the act? So we want to see that depth of knowledge. And also importantly is for them to link it to each of the behavioral statements. So if they're using the good pharmacy practice or if they're using the Pharmacy Act, it should, in essence, in this 5.3 example, should be linked to 5.3A, which is the behavioral statement. Then it gives the assessor and moderator an idea of where it is all linked together. Describe the reason for using the resource or don't. Often we don't see a reason. So why do they choose that particular piece of resource? How is it relevant? How is the scope of practice within the GPP relevant to that competency standard? What evidence can I submit to support my learning activity? That's a question they need to ask themselves. How can they support or suggest or show to the assessor and moderator that they know exactly what they're doing and where they're going to get that information to prove competence? And planning is written in the future tense. So what will I do? So if you look at the grid on the right there, in order to get the full three, they need to provide a detailed plan in future tense, the reasoning behind the resources, specific details of the resources, and they link it to at least 75% of the behavioral statements. So that's quite straightforward, but it's one of the most challenging sections we, as assessors and moderators, come across because they don't give us those details in terms of linking to behavioral statements or providing chapters or page numbers. So don't only describe how your plan will proceed, but say what you're going to do, how and why you're going to do it, and the things this way, as well as when you're going to do it. So the planning section, as I said, it's usually poorly done. But if they follow these requirements, they will get through it quickly. And then the checklist again, also in the manual, which is a great tool. How can you help them with the planning section? The planning section, and here what we did was just to give you some tips on some ideas. So you could use reflective tools such as self-assessment questionnaires or skill gap analysis, suggest specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant and time-bound goals. We all know the SMART goals. So example, instead of saying improve communication skills, you could suggest complete a course on patient counseling techniques. And we live in an information age where information is accessible at our fingertips. So literally going online, they could easily find or have access to such information. designing training plans, so case studies, role playing, workshops. And again, pharmacists, we have access to a lot of learning material. Implement the training, provide clear instructions and demonstrate tasks, monitor their progress by using checklists or tracking. And as I said, I know it's really you inundated in the pharmacy, but if you have a group of people, you could interns, you could get them to team up together to get these systems in place. Reflect and adjust, gather feedback from the intern to refine their plan. Use a variety of teaching methods to cater to different learning styles, and encourage the intern to reflect on their progress and share insights. So, SWOT analysis you could use as a potential tool, which is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that potentially you see in the intern, and use reflection prompts such as what do I need to improve in order to deliver better patient care. The next step is your implementation step, which is the core of a CPD for an intern. So within the implementation step, you can see the grid there. And here, what we expect is the implementation must be written in the past because they've already done it. So I did um, patient packaging, or I did the label, or whatever it may be. So in terms of the context, we would like to see the what, the when, the where, and the how. So the reference also must be made to the evidence in the implementation description. So when they're describing that they looked at the Schedule 6 register and they balanced it every quarter, for example, we want to say, okay, this particular statement is linked to evidence 5.5, or however they reference their evidence, or evidence A or evidence one, whatever it may be. So in order to, when they do that, it gives us the better picture of what the intern is talking about and where we can make reference to. Remember to link to 75% of the behavioral statement. So together with linking to the evidence, the intern also needs to link to the behavioral statement. So if it's 5.3a, they need to refer to 5.3a within the implementation in line with their evidence, be it one, be it two, etc. So here, in order to achieve competency or fully competent, you'll see three there where the description of the what, the where, when, and how is very clear within the text. Reference is made to the evidence and reference is made to the behavioral statements. And then lastly, in terms of evidence, now a lot of interns fail. They comply with everything else. They're competent in all of the other sections, but they fail within their evidence. And often we find they don't link it. The annotation is missing completely within the evidence. So we have no idea why they submitted that particular evidence. They sometimes will submit a page of a GPP with no evidence or no information as to where it relates to a particular behavioral statement. So we are clueless as to where this fits in within the picture. Sometimes they'll submit pictures of them just standing with a prescription or speaking to a patient, but no relation to how it links up to the behavioral statement. So we want a clear story in order to help us navigate through that process of marking them and making them more competent. And remember, we want to see, and they need to prove to us how they are competent. So the evidence has to make sense. So the evidence has to be valid, authentic, current, and sufficient, which we'll go through just now in terms of what that means. And it has to be linked to at least 75% of the behavioral statements. And then all of the other, these three must be there. So the evidence must be annotated. It must show the behavioral statements that it's satisfying and how it is satisfying the behavioral statement. So linking it, but also showing us the implementation of it. So how are they practically doing it? And they are able to show evidence that they are competent in that area. We really do struggle often with the evidence. So please, if you could help them through that to understand. And these really are clearly outlined in order to guide them. Sorry. Um, The implementation tool, so we have a checklist again. So each of the steps has a checklist. Again, in the manual, great tool, just as a double check system when they completed that section. And that's the evidence. Again, also a great tool. just to go through the process of, do I have this? Have I done this? Which makes it so much easier. Okay, so the last step is evaluation. Evaluation also is an area that we struggle with in terms of interns not fulfilling all of the requirements. If you look at evaluation, which is um, number three, in order to obtain full competence, they have to have all of these four aspects. So what was learned in terms of the competency standard, they have to, and they have to relate it to what they initially began with. So in the reflection, they said, I need to learn how to do a Schedule 6 register. Then in this section in evaluation, they need to tell us, so what was learned? And it has to be described. This is what I learned in terms of the Schedule 6 register, whatever it may be. And then how the learning influenced his or her way of practice. So how did it change their practice? Now, are they able to obviously do the Schedule 6 register, but what else have they learned? How has it influenced the environment that they work in? The application by means of a practical and actual example. So they must tell us how they implemented that within their practice. And then lastly, which often is missed, is identifying a future learning need in relation to the skills that were learned. And here we look for examples that need to be very specific. So tell us what their future learning need in relation to the skills that they've just covered within the CPD, and provide really good specific examples to that need that they've identified. So focus here is evaluation is written in the future tense. Learning outcome, what have you learned? What I did? Application, how have you subsequently used your acquired knowledge or skills? The impact, how has your acquired knowledge or skills changed your practice? And then identification of a specific future learning need related to that domain. And the example is critical. If you don't have the example there, if the intern doesn't have the example there, they're not seen as fully competent. They usually get a 2 for that. Yeah, and then the checklist again. So the next one is the evidence. As I mentioned, the evidence is really the crucial part of the CPD. If they fail the evidence, they are not deemed yet competent, and they'll have to repeat the CPD. So the key things we look for when they submit evidence is these aspects where it has to be annotated. So they must show us on that evidence, what does this mean? What does it mean in relation to, for example, the Medicines Act and looking at the authenticity of a prescription? If they're showing us an arrow to the date or to the MP number on a prescription or to the patient ID number, how is that related to to the Medicines Act? So it must be clear and must be annotated, must tell a story to the assessor and moderator for us to see that they are competent. It must be current, valid, authentic, and sufficient. So as I was saying, in terms of annotation, it gives meaning to the evidence. It tells a story. The evidence and the annotation must be easy to read. So sometimes we see interns who may not annotate at all, but also the annotation is not very clear. We're unsure what it means and how is it related to that competency standard or that behavioral statement. They must justify why, this evidence or annotation justifies to us as the assessor and moderator why that evidence was included. It must be planned and it must be meaningful. It must provide links to the behavioral statements. So the story is critical. I mean, that's how we will assess and we are able to see that they are deemed competent. So as a note, what annotation is not, it's not just merely labels. It's not single words next to parts of evidence. It's not scribbles and evidence and lacking links to behavioral statements. So if we look at an example here in terms of annotation of the date on a prescription, the difference between what a meaningful annotation is and what an annotation with no value looks like. So if we look at the date on the left, which says 20/02/2026, and the description says with the annotation, it says for a prescription to be valid, it must be presented for dispensing within 1 month after it was written. This prescription is thus valid. An annotation with no value where they have the date and they say this is the date of the prescription. So it has to be linked to whatever legislation, if that's what it entails in terms of the annotation that they're providing. I have an example here of what a typical annotation, sorry, a submission looks like. And based on what I've mentioned to you so far, I just want you to have a look at some of the things we look for, and based on that assessment grid, as I've mentioned. So I'm going to go through this. I'll just read it through so it's quicker. So the reflections title says evaluation and dispensing of a Schedule 6 prescription in terms of the ethical and legal requirements. So in terms of what you think, whether this would be an adequate title, learning title, and remember that learning title must be original, descriptive, and related to the competency standard. And if you can see in terms of what um, this particular 5.3 is related to, which is your ethical and legal practice, we know that it is a Schedule 6 will be looking at ethical and legal practice. So it would be seen as a good title. So describe the learning need that you have identified to improve your knowledge and skills and what you hope to achieve after addressing this learning need. And remember, here we're looking at a clear learning need according to the competency standard, associated behavioral statements that they need to provide. So in terms of what happened and what triggered that learning need and what they hope to achieve after completing it. So just looking at the highlighted parts, I am not yet comfortable with dispensing a Schedule 6 prescription as I'm unfamiliar with the procedure and how it is handled in our pharmacy. So that's a great trigger in terms of the previous line that they said they weren't confident enough. They never dispensed a prescription, Schedule 6 prescription under direct supervision, and that was the trigger. I need to refresh my knowledge of Schedule 6 prescription requirements to clarify my scope of practice as a pharmacist intern. I aim to ethically and legally dispense Schedule 6 prescriptions within my scope of practice and learn to perform my duties in accordance with the Pharmacist Code of Conduct. I want to apply the Pharmacy Act and the Medicines and Related Substances Act in my daily practice. So indication what they want to achieve in terms of within this competency standard. Planning section, based on what I was saying to you in the planning section, remember here we want to see that it's written in future tense, that the reasoning behind the use of the resources are there, specific details of the resources provided, and linking it to 75% of the behavioral statements. So immediately just looking at it, you can see that there's no evidence of any behavioral statements that were linked here. So that would make it not yet fully competent. They may pass it, but they may get a 2 for it because there's no linking to behavioral statements. So here the intern said, I will stay up to date on Schedule 6 legislation by studying the laws and relevant amendments. Oh, sorry, there's the behavioral statement. My apologies. Behavioral statement C. I will use the Pharmacy Act and its newest amendments to clarify my scope of practice as a pharmacist intern, practicing pharmacist intern. I will review Section 36 of the Medicines and Related Substance Act to understand the proper validation, dispensing, and documentation of a Schedule 6 prescription. I will complete these actions while adhering to the professional standards and my responsibilities as a pharmacist in accordance with the rules in the Code of Conduct and the GPP. So you can see that in the Code of Conduct and the GPP, there's no reference to the chapter or to the page number or to the section. So we're not sure which part of the Code of Conduct will be related to this particular competency standard. And how do we know that it's not just looking at the whole of the Code of Conduct, the whole of the GPP? We're not sure. So for that reason, although the behavioral statement C is there for the first one, we will still give this intern a 2 because they haven't given us all of the information. Code of conduct at the bottom, part 1, but GPP it was missing. Implementation. So here, if you remember from implementation, we're looking for information that's the tense and also in relation to what, where, when, and how. And the reference must be made to the evidence and linking to the behavioral statements. So just a quick look, you can see that the evidence information is there. So the intern has related it to evidence B1, E1, etc. Behavioral statements are there as well. Behavioral statements C, behavioral statement E, D, etc. So by looking at it quickly, I use the Pharmacy Act number 53 of 1974 and its latest amendments to confirm my scope and that I'm a registered pharmacist intern. I saw I have the scope of practice of a pharmacist while being directly supervised by a registered pharmacist. I validated the prescription in the evidence A3 according to the Medicines Related Substance Act. I dispensed prescription, printed labels, and trailer label. So you can see the tense is also right. They've written um, that they've done this in the past tense. I recorded the sale in the Schedule 6 register and applied the medication label on the medication that I took out of the Schedule 6 cabinet. The label was according to the good pharmacy practice. My supervisor checked my work throughout this process and they provide the evidence. I checked that my personal indemnity insurance was up to date. I maintained confidentiality by blocking out their personal information. I followed and applied the pharmacist code of conduct, which I learned from the GPP part 1. So if we look at this, at least 75% of the behavioral statements have been covered. So um, I'm not sure why that statement is at the bottom. We'll just ignore that. So you can see that information is available, and this in turn would probably be deemed as competent within this implementation stage. And that's the examples of the evidence that was submitted. So you can see from the evidence that the intern has provided based on, remember, this is 5.3, which is legal and ethical practice. So the Pharmacy Act is there and they provide annotation as to what a pharmacist intern is, linking it to behavioral statement A. Then you'll see the registration of the intern there. Pharmacy practice 35A, what the scope of practice is. Application of the Medicines and Related Substance Act. So you can see the description there, which is nicely done, and it's linked to behavioral statement C, which is there. It says in the annotation, this extract of the Medicines and Related Substance Act stipulates that Schedule 6 medication shall not be sold by any person other than a pharmacist, pharmacist intern, or pharmacist assistant under the direct supervision of a pharmacist. I use this piece of literature to confirm that I'm allowed to perform the dispensing of Schedule 6 medication. I'm a registered pharmacist intern. Therefore, according to legislation, I'm allowed to sell Schedule 6 medication upon prescription by an authorized prescriber under the direct supervision of a pharmacist. Validation of the prescription, you can see on the left there, there's a checklist that they have based on the environment or the sector that they work in, that provided the checklist for them. So it was a great tool to provide as evidence to show to us that they know what the systematic process is of checking whether a prescription is actually valid. And then on the left there, you'll see the tutor's details, the prescriber's details, the date of, sorry, the actual prescription, the date of the prescription on which it was dispensed, excuse me, the surname and qualification, and then all of the other information like the MP number as well. So this is what we would like to see in terms of the evidence and the detail that they need to provide in order to make them competent. We don't want to just see arrows and just a single line. We want to be able to understand what that evidence actually means in relation to the competency standard in order to make them competent. Some more pieces of evidence. You can see the Schedule 6 covered there under the direct supervision of the pharmacist. A picture of the product that was dispensed, and then you'll look at the label and the information that goes into the label. You can see that confidentiality has been maintained by blocking out the information. A picture of this, a screenshot of the dispensing program was provided in terms of documentation of the sale. And then on the top right corner, there's Section 36 of the Medicines Act, which relays the sale of Schedule 6 medication that needs to be documented into a register and gives us all of the information that goes into a register. In relation to this evidence, what other information we would like to have seen was the actual register. which shows us what information was put in, obviously by blocking out the patient information, but that could be an uh, additional amount of evidence that could further show competence for this intern. So evaluation, after completing the CPD, I gained a clearer understanding of the legal and ethical aspects of dispensing and documenting the sale of Schedule 6 substances. I now understand my scope of practice as a pharmacist intern and the duties I'm permitted to perform. I feel more confident in evaluating a Schedule 6 prescription to assess their validity and dispensing and documenting them properly, appropriately. I'm also better informed about the code of conduct that I must follow. And by applying these principles, I feel that I'm becoming a more competent pharmacist intern. I use different techniques to make sure patients understand how to use their medication, like color and labels, hand gestures, and pictures. A future learning need I identified is how to correctly use a Seroflow synchro breathe breath actuated inhaler. So here, if you remember, in this step, what we look for is what was learned in terms of the competency standard, how the learning influenced his or her way of practice, application by means of practical or actual examples, and identifying the future learning need in terms of or in relation to the skills that they've just learned. So here, what's missing is the practical the application of the practical examples in identifying a future learning need in terms of the skills that were learned. So here you'll see, even though the future learning need is the seroflow and how the actuated inhaler works or how it should be used, it is not in relation to what this particular competency standard entails, which is ethical and legal practice. So we want to see an example of a future learning need within this particular competency standard. Okay, just to go over what each of the evidence, the evidence in terms of the components that make them correct. So they have to be current. The evidence must be current. So the entries must relate to exposure within that period of internship. Evidence must therefore be collected during that internship year and don't include anything from their undergrad years. It must be valid. So evidence must pertain to that specific competency. So you can't submit, for example, a prescription on compounding and what compounding is about for an ethical and legal practice. It has to relate to that particular competency. If factual or calculation errors occur in the evidence and confidentiality as well, we see it as not yet competent. If the evidence is not valid, the other four criteria of sufficiency and currency does not, does not apply. So the intern immediately will fail the competency. If the competency is about how to make sushi for your evidence, and your evidence is about what is the best source to have with it, it is of no value. Okay, so just as an example, your evidence has to be authentic, so it must be your own work. You can't be using somebody else's work from a previous year. It should not be, just ensure that it really is their evidence and their piece of work that they are submitting. The evidence must be verified online by you as the tutor, and then the tutor verification process, which you are aware of, that you must verify all of the entries before they are able to submit. Sufficient. So the sufficiency, again, just to be repetitive, in terms of the amount of evidence that they need to submit. So if there are four more, they must cover 75% of the behavioral statements. For example, if they have 4 behavioral statements, they must submit 3 pieces of evidence in order to show that they are competent. The same piece of evidence can't be used for more than one competency standard. And we sometimes see that where interns will submit competency standards, evidence for different competency standards and the same evidence. And remember, as assessors and moderators, we get the same intern through the entire year. So that ensures that we are able to review and have a look at what the intern is submitting. Do not submit an entire legislative document like the Pharmacy Act or the GPP. Be more selective and meaningful in terms of the evidence that they submit. Do not add evidence that may have clauses for intellectual property. Example, manufacturing interns will submit evidence that is confidential to that site. And we sometimes see that where interns often from a manufacturing side, will send us documents where the entire document is blocked out. And we're unable to see any information as to what that intern was submitting. So rather not submit that type of evidence and rather find something or suggest to them another piece of evidence that they could use to justify how they could be deemed competent. Make sure that they have enough evidence that's really critical, and focus on quality and not on the quantity of evidence. Because sometimes we see interns submitting a lot of evidence that really makes no sense to what their submission is about. Okay. So these are some of the types of evidence we do see. So photos, I mean, we are happy to take photos for this to see photos as evidence, but it has to be meaningful. It has to show us something. It must make sense in terms of what the story is. So make sure there's a date stamp on that photo. It's meaningless unless it's authenticated and the intern identifies themselves. Can be anyone in the picture. We're not sure. We don't know everybody as interns. So we need to know who is who in that picture and what are they trying to show. And then patient confidentiality. So they must block out the patient's eyes. Pictures or pages from the SAMP. So the reference name, edition, page number. What does this show in terms of the SAMP? Is it really them just showing us that they could use a scanner or a photocopier? Delivery notes. So what does a delivery note show? Don't just, we get submissions of delivery notes, but we're not sure what are they trying to show us. Are they showing us where it came from? What is the delivery date? What is the quantity, batch number, expiry date? Whatever it may be that they are referring to within that delivery note. Um, Signatures are not annotated and they're really meaningless. Whose signature was it? Was it somebody who checked it? Was it the data capture? Was it the delivery person? We're not sure. So it must be clearer when they're describing it. So put yourself in the assessor's shoes or the moderator's shoes when they are submitting evidence. As I said, what does it show? Tell us the story. How are your pictures of evidence or your evidence relating to the competency? Is it showing competence? And will you be able to pass off that? No high glossy photos, not uploaded upside down. So we see a lot of interns submitting their evidence upside down, which becomes very frustrating for us as assessors and moderators. It must be clear and legible. It must be in one document. So it makes the flow to understand the process of what they're referring to easier for us. And then annotation, we're repeating it. Annotation, annotation, annotation. So it's really important to give us what the story is all about. Linking to evidence to a specific behavioral statement, identify their own signature, and remember the assessor does not know you, does not know the intern. So we need that information to be able to identify whether they're competent or not. Kinds of evidence, so attendance register, for example, the presenter's name, the date, the venue. Only one presenter we'd like to see. We don't want group evidence. We're not allowing that anymore, and the intern will be failed on that. Feedback on the presentation should reflect knowledge and understanding of the audience after the presentation. It is not the rating of the presenter. So sometimes what we see interns submit is they will submit a register, and then the feedback on the presentation would be whether he was or she was a good presenter, etc. But what we want to know, for example, if it's a public health campaign, they need to be able to show us evidence that the audience understood what they delivered, and that shows how competent they are. Did the patient understand on maybe it was a worm infestation presentation? What do they understand about worms? What didn't they know? Now that they know this, how are they going to change their behaviors? That kind of information we'd like to see as feedback on the presentation. And of course, annotation and linking to behavioral statements. If they're submitting a prescription, so here in terms of the evidence, in terms of a prescription, also they need to relate it to that particular competency standard. Sometimes we find interns will submit a prescription on a PIT, pharmacist-initiated therapy, and there's no link between a prescription and a PIT. We want to see over-the-counter um, uh, examples and not a prescription, and that's often happens as well when interns are submitting evidence. The group I mentioned already, and then the in terms of the attendance register, we'd like to see the presentation as well of what information they've provided to the audience and the reference material that they've used, and of course the feedback. If you're consulting with a patient, we'd like to see patient history, the request, the form, the blue copy, the label, the reference material that they've used. If they're consulting a doctor, we'd like to see what the reason for that consultation was. What was the reference material that they used to help them during that consultation with the doctor? And the telephone number of the doctor and the time of the conversation. Some of the references that we see interns use are questionable, so we don't want to see reference material that comes from Wikipedia. We want to teach them to use evidence-based resources to make sure that they are providing scientific information. Okay. In terms of data collection, so why they analyzing that data, the reason for their data collection, especially in research, where they're doing the research component of the competency standard. And then this is the evidence checklist, which we've covered already. So the summary, what was done, and it's not really just merely reading an article or a theoretical scenario or witnessing someone else. You must convince the assessor that you are competent in that competency standard. It must be clear, it must be visible and easy to read, and it must not be a scribble. Okay, in terms of the portfolio of evidence and the tutor verification, we'll get to this a little bit later, but you are aware that you need to verify all of the submissions of your intern and make sure that you have done your declaration as well. Not sure. Ibrahim, are you taking over from here? Or have I moved past?
You've moved past, Prof.
Stop me, Ibrahim. I wasn't even sure which slide it was. Okay, I'm wondering why I'm so tired. So it's your turn. Gonna leave it to you, Ibrahim.
Thanks, Prof. Can you start the slideshow?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that now.
Good morning, colleagues. I'll be doing the final bits of the presentation. So when we look at the assessment, and we've covered that a little bit with the criteria at the beginning part of this particular presentation, but just to reiterate and to go through how these portfolio of evidences are assessed, they're done mostly on a scale of 0 to 3. So to earn three marks, all the requirements must be met. So again, I will refer you to the assessment criteria, which is page 35 and 36 of the intern manual. And I can't stress enough how important it is for the intern and for the tutor to make themselves very familiar with the assessment criteria and the assessment checklist. Because when we discuss assessments with interns who might not be happy with the assessment, whatever, sometimes late in the year, after they've submitted 2 or 3 times already, when you start speaking to them about the assessment criteria and the assessment checklist, we become acutely aware that they're not aware of it. And if you're not submitting against that, then you're not going to be fulfilling those criteria. So to earn all 3 marks, all 3 requirements must be met. Follow the assessment criteria for each of the 4 phases of the CPD cycle. So there is an assessment criteria for the title, for the reflection, for the planning, for the implementation, the evidence, the evaluation. So you have to meet those criteria to be able to be, hello? You have to be able to meet those criteria to be able to be found competent for those CPDs. In addition to that, you must also have an appropriate professional communication style. Therefore, you must make sure that your entry is free of spelling and grammatical errors. Remember that spelling and grammatical errors are not auto-corrected on the particular portfolio of evidence platform that you use. It does not automatically correct these things. So you have to make sure and read that. Make sure it's properly punctuated and the trade names are capitalized. As an assessor, I just want to stress that it's it's clear and obvious to see when you read it sometimes that there are clear errors that even a person who just starts reading English will be able to pick up those errors. So please go back and read when before you verify the intern submission, because if it's incomplete sentences, or if the sentences structure is not correct, or they've uploaded the wrong text there, as a tutor, before verifying on their behalf, you will be able to see that and be able to ask them to correct it. Okay, we move over to the next slide. Okay, so 0 means not yet met. The verdict of 1 means partially met, 2 is met, and 3 is fully met. Again, check the intern manual. Page 35 and 36 is where we will find the assessment criteria. Okay, so with regard to feedback from assessors, what can the tutor and the intern expect? Okay, there will be comments, and the comments are dated. It is dated because sometimes an intern might submit more than one submission for a particular competency standard. They might be found not yet competent on the first attempt, and then there's a subsequent attempt. So then the intern does not get confused in terms of this comment fits with which submission. So that's why those comments are dated. The comments can be positive. So even if the intern has received a verdict of competence, the assessor or moderator might still make feedback comments to say that you are on the right track, or if there's something that was missing, but there's still competent advice might be given. So the intern must go back, even if they're competent, to read and see if there's any pointers that the assessor or moderator wants to give them for their future submissions. If it's negative, I, w- I wouldn't call it negative. If there's comments or shortcomings that are found within that submission, then the assessor and the moderator will make specific pointers with regards to why that submission is not yet competent. Is your evidence not sufficient? Is it not current? Is it not valid? Is there issues in terms of your text with your reflection? Do you have a trigger? Are you saying clearly what your personal learning need is? So the intern has to go back and read those comments. Those comments will point them in the right direction in terms of what were the issues with regard to the submission that they have sent in. Especially with regards to the evidence. I mean, it's been highlighted above at length in terms of it needs to be current, valid, sufficient, authentic. A lot of comments will be made around the evidence and annotation and those types of things. So in future submissions, the intern must pay special regard with regards to the comments made for each particular section within their portfolio of evidence submission. Those comments are guidelines for the next entries. Even if it's attached to an entry that's assessed as competent, as I said, there might be guidelines. So the assessor might say, look, the benefit of the doubt has been given to you with this particular entry, but these are the issues or the things that led to the benefit of the doubt, or ensure that your evidence is clear and legible. It had to be zoomed in many times for the assessor to be able to read this. Your annotation needs to be more clearer, or whatever the comment is, but you have to read the comment in order to be able to make those changes. Okay, and on the other thing that we want to highlight is that there are feedback sessions later in the year where we have these meetings where the intern and the tutor can note any issues that they have with assessment or assessor comments, and that can be dealt with in meetings later in the year. We can move to the next slide. Okay, how do you resubmit a portfolio of evidence entry? Okay, if the entry is found not yet successful, the intern needs to resubmit a CPD within that domain. Okay, so as was alluded to earlier, there are 6 domains, and the intern has to submit one competency standard from each domain. So if you are successful in competency standards in domains 1, 2, and 3, and you're not successful in 4, you have to submit another entry from that domain 4. You can't submit 2 for domain 2 or domain 6. So if it is not found successful, the intern needs to resubmit the CPD within that domain. And each submission is a standalone and is treated as a new submission. This is very important. What interns tend to do, for example, is say you're doing a CPD on 4.6, which means to apply an SOP and apply a policy. And in your reflection, in your first submission, you state that your learning need is to learn how to apply the SOP for receiving stock. And you say why that is your learning need and what your trigger is. Then you go on to the planning and you plan to read the SOP and the relevant policy. And then you write your implementation and evidence. And then you move on to evaluation. For some reason, say that you are not yet competent in that particular competency standard. Maybe your evidence was not sufficient to cover 75% of the behavioral statements, or it's more than just a breach of confidentiality. Say that there were major shortcomings with regard to that submission, and the intern was alerted to that with the comments. On resubmission, the intern now thinks that, okay, I was competent for my reflection, so I'm not going to change that text. And say in the second submission now, they're submitting something, a different SOP. They want to now deal with disposal of expired stock. Now their reflection reads something like their learning need is to receive stock, and then the rest of the CPD, they haven't changed the reflection, is now about disposal of expired stock. So that reflection won't be correct. The other thing is recognition. If you're doing the SOP for receiving again, making notes of all the errors you made on your first submission, and then you're going back and you're going to repeat the activity, and then you want to make sure that you don't make that errors again so that your learning is complete. In your reflection, if you state that I had never received stock before, I'm not aware of the SOP, I'm not aware of the policy, then the assessor comment will be, but 2 months ago, you did exactly the same CPD. You said that you needed to do it. You did a 4-step CPD. There's no recognition of what you learned from that first submission. So that's what we mean by each submission is a standalone. You need to look at all cycles of all the steps of your CPD or portfolio of evidence submission and say, is my reflection reading correctly? Is my planning reading correctly? Is my implementation now describing the activity I'm doing now, or is it describing the previous activity I did? Does my implementation text match with the current evidence that I've put in, or is it speaking about the previous evidence? So each resubmission is a standalone. And so when you are assisting the intern as well as a tutor, just make sure that you're seeing that submission is a standalone. Only if there was breach of confidentiality, or if the assessor says, look, these are 0 criteria, but they're very important, but you need to change this, this, and this, and you keep the rest of your submission the same, then you can. If that statement is not made, then you should do a new entry and start from the beginning and make sure that the resubmission entry is a standalone. Assessors and moderators can view the previous submission entry and comments. So if you cut and paste your previous submission for your reflection text or your planning text, the assessor and moderator can see your previous submission and they can see the previous comments. So the comments will be similar if you just cut and paste and put exactly the same entry. So you need to see the guidelines in the intern and tutor manual in terms of the conditions for resubmission of a portfolio of evidence entry. What is that application procedure will also be unpacked in that intern tutor manual, and the timelines in terms of when can you resubmit a portfolio of evidence entries. So to maximize the chance of being eligible to write the intern examination, we urge interns to submit early, submit regularly on a monthly basis. If you wait for the submission deadline just before the examination, and now you receive a portfolio of every entry that is not yet competent, you won't have time to be able to make the commensurate changes and resubmit. So this is why we're saying submit early so that you get a feel of the assessor comments, and and what is the expectation out there, and what is the level of your submission, so that you can make those commensurate changes way before critical deadlines, before you need to write the exams. Next slide. Okay, so what are those common errors are seen on resubmission? Interns not following the assessor and moderator comments. Um, it seems obvious that if something is not successful, that you would want to know why it's not successful. But when we see those resubmissions, we can't help but think, did the intern actually read the comments? So making no changes on the resubmission and then submitting the same thing again, remember that the same assessor will be assessing the resubmission. So it's not as though to say, okay, maybe that assessor didn't find mine competent, but the next assessor will. So it's to the same assessor. And so read the comments and make the changes on resubmission. Another error is retrospectively falsifying of evidence to meet the assessor comments. So what we mean here is, say, for example, you've done the portfolio of evidence for compounding of extemporaneous compounding of medication. And the assessor comment said, look, your expiry date is incorrect. According to the Medicines Act Regulation 3.1, you can only give your compounded product a 30-day expiry, or according to the label regulations, the address of your facility is not on the label, or according to the GPP, there's no evidence that you were supervised during each step of the compounding procedure. So there might be many shortcomings highlighted. And so this compound product was compounded, let's say, on the 6th of February, and you submitted the batch manufacturing record, and you've got assessed towards the end of February, and you get your feedback, and then you see that these are all the issues. So what you do then is you go back and then you change the expiry date, you change the batch manufacturing record, you retrospectively falsify that evidence. That does not show that you are competent in the activity. It just shows that you are competent in changing the evidence. And when we are assessing these CPDs, we want to know that you are competent in performing the activity at the time of doing the activity, that you're not changing evidence retrospectively. That medication has been dispensed with that label, with the incorrect expiry date, without evidence that you've been supervised. All of those errors cannot be corrected retrospectively. So obviously, if you're doing it again, then you have to start again with a new product compounded, being cognizant of the fact of all the errors that were highlighted before, so that you don't repeat the errors. Or if you're unaware of certain legislation, you can go up and read up on the legislation and make sure that your entry then follows that. Another thing is when you're doing the outcome on training staff, maybe you did not put the planning for training, and you've conducted the training and you've evaluated the training, and then it's only 3 behavioral statements, and the assessor says, no, there's no planning for what you wanted to train on. On resubmission, you submit exactly the same thing, and now suddenly you have a plan. If there was a plan, you would have checked the checklist, you would have checked the assessment criteria, your tutor would have checked it and verified it for you, and it should have been submitted. So we're saying that you can't falsify evidence and add it according to assessor comments. You must be competent in the activity at the time of doing the activity. Another issue is not starting a new competency standard. So here, what we want to say is that the assessor will recommend that whether the competency standard can be corrected. So for example, if everything was okay with the evidence and just the issue was a breach of confidentiality, the assessor will say your portfolio of evidence entry would have been competent but for the breach of confidentiality. Then you know that you need to just sort out the breach of confidentiality and you don't have to start one anew. But if there is breach of confidentiality and then the assessor is also making you aware of other behavioral statements that haven't been met, and you can see that there's a whole lot of shortcomings beside the breach of confidentiality, you have to ask yourself, can these issues be sorted out retrospectively? Or if I sort it out retrospectively, am I falsifying evidence? If you are falsifying evidence, then you obviously have to start that particular submission from the start again with a new activity, so that you correct all of those things with the current activity that you're doing. So another issue is not checking all phases of the cycle to align to the new information provided. As I alluded in the last slide, in your last submission, you were submitting according to applying the SOP for receiving stock. In your new submission, you've changed your activity now, and now you decided to apply the SOP for disposal of expired stock, but you haven't gone back and changed your reflection text. So when you submit the old reflection text, which speaks about receiving stock, and then you might submit the planning text, which is also receiving stock, and then your implementation in evidence deals with disposal of expired stock. So then you will be not yet competent for the sections on reflection and planning because it doesn't speak about the activity that you are currently doing now. And again, if there's amendments to what you're doing in terms of the activity, in terms of in activity one, you were receiving amlodipine, and in activity two, you're receiving another medication, but now you're speaking about the previous medication that you received. Again, that particular phase or cycle of the CPD will be marked not yet competent because it's not speaking to the activity that you are currently doing now. Next. Okay, resubmission of portfolio of evidence. To prevent the need for further resubmission, make sure to follow the assessor's recommendation and comments, which we covered. Resubmitted portfolio of evidence entries are sent to the same assessor, which we also covered. So don't just resubmit the same thing and hope for a better outcome. Don't simply resubmit without attending to the reasons for the entry being deemed not yet successful. You are allowed to submit 9 portfolio of evidence entries. You are supposed to submit 6, and SAPC allows you 50% resubmission. So that means if you are not yet competent for 3 out of them, then a total of 9 portfolio of evidence entries can be submitted. But from the 10th entry that you resubmit, fees will be levied for that. So the first 9 entries are free. And from the 10th entry, a fee will be levied for every entry that you submit. So it's very important that interns don't burn their submissions in terms of resubmitting the same thing or not changing it or not taking advice of the assessor's comments. Because once you finish 9 entries, from the 10th entry, the intern will have to pay a fee to submit these POE entries. Next. Okay, so with regard to remarking of the portfolio of evidence entry, interns who are dissatisfied with the outcome of the assessment may apply for a remark. The application must be submitted in writing within 1 calendar month following the official release of results. So once the results are released by Pharmacy Council, the intern has a month to apply for this remarking. Late applications will not be considered. There is a non-refundable remarking fee of 327 Rand is payable upon submission of the application. The proof of payment must accompany the request to ensure processing. The same portfolio of evidence entry that was previously assessed must be resubmitted unchanged. Again, this is a remarking, and it's the difference between a remarking and a resubmission. A resubmission, yes, you make a new entry, so you can make changes. But if you asking for it to be amendments, additions, or corrections are the purpose of the remarking is to review the original assessment only. Results will be finalized and released within 14 the date of a receipt of a complete application, including the proof of payments. Next. Okay, with regards to the submission of the portfolio of evidence, interns are urged to maintain a high level of professionalism. With regards to plagiarism, the Turnitin report worked for a period of time last year. We're working on some gremlins on that report, and it might be available again later in the year. With this report, you will be able to see similarity score between your intern submission and submissions made by interns previously throughout the year. So that's fed into this Turnitin system. When they then submit their entry, it matches the both entries and it gives you a similarity score. If the similarity score is quite high, as the tutor, you have to alert the intern and speak to the intern, and that submission has to be changed. because if it comes through, the assessor and the moderator can also have a look at that report and then flag it to say that it is very similar to a previous intern's submission. The portfolio of evidence entries must reflect their own work. So as a tutor, you must check that they are not, if there's other interns within the facility, that they're not copying other interns within their facility, or they're not using work of previous interns from that facility, or anything like that. It must be their own work that they submit. Any irregularities will be referred to the professional conduct department. There will be penalties for interns, and expect them to be applied and expect them to be severe if they are caught copying another intern or using someone else's work. I want to make you aware of Ethical Rule 16 here, which states that the failure as a tutor to carry out your duty to supervise the training of the intern or your administrative duties attached towards registration of the intern could lead to penalties. Because you're submitting on behalf of the intern and you are verifying it online before you submit for the intern, you also have to check for professionalism, plagiarism, and all of these issues here before you verify and submit on behalf of the interns. Uh, Portfolio of evidence submissions are more than just another hurdle. They're an opportunity for you to further develop your professionalism. And we find that interns who view this as just another hurdle, these are the interns that tend to uh, do things that are unprofessional. But interns who look at this as an opportunity to learn, submit good portfolio of evidence entries, which are original and authentic. Next slide. Confidentiality is very important. It must be maintained at all times. It's a zero criteria. If there's breach of patient confidentiality, it does not matter the strength of the portfolio of evidence submission. It still will be not yet competent. So make sure that every piece of evidence does not have patient details, which is your prescriptions, your trailer labels, Schedule 6 registers. Again, if you're in a waiting area, if you are doing a campaign in the waiting area of your pharmacy, and then you submit an attendance register, all of those people who are sitting there are patients. And so make sure that none of the names are there. But if they're signatures and you can't really ascertain what the name of the patient is fine. But if they sign their name as a signature, then all of those information must be blanked out. Automatically, you're not yet successful if the confidentiality is breached. And here we're speaking about patient confidentiality. Confidentiality does not apply to doctors, hospitals, or other facilities. So you can't have a document where you're blanking out everything, the patient details, the doctor details, hospital details, every details. There's not much left within the evidence. So when we're dealing with confidentiality here, we're dealing with patient confidentiality, and the other information needs to be there. So when you're dealing with staff attendance registers, there's no confidentiality there, or careful not to blank out all your evidence, such as signatures. So, for example, if it is a signature, as I said, and you can't, uh, from that signature, say who the patient is or whatever it is, it can show that, look, that's authentic, that a patient did sign that particular document. Make sure the name and any other identifying detail is completely obscured. Untidy scribbles are ineffective. So sometimes what the interns do is that they try to blank out the patient details by themselves by just scribbling over the name or whatever it is. Or sometimes they end up blanking it out, but the method that they use to blank it out is actually highlighting the patient details, or it's not scribbled enough where you can actually still read the name of the patient. So as long as it's not just the name, it's the patient file number or any other details, cell phone numbers of the patients, if it's there in attendance registers, these are all personal details, and all of them need to be looked at with regards to confidentiality. So every piece of evidence needs to be gone through thoroughly to make sure that there's no breach of patient confidentiality. Next. Next slide. Okay, so the next couple of slides, what we looked at is to be able to assist you with the decision making in terms of which competency standards are recommended, which is a good choice and should present no problems for any intern, which are possible. That means the intern could consider them very carefully, only to choose if you are able to collect valid and sufficient evidence. And the last criteria is we say that that particular competency standard is challenging. So avoid it. It will be extremely difficult to complete with sufficient evidence. So basically, assessors and moderators have been assessing and moderating over a period of time. We have looked at intern submissions over a lengthy period of time, and we've looked at statistics for particular competency standards to say how many interns have submitted, how many interns have actually been successful in this particular competency standards, and what were the reasons they were not successful. And so on the basis of that, we looked at each domain, we looked at each competency standard, and then we gave it either a recommended, a possible, or challenging. Again, to reiterate, recommended means there should be no issues with getting evidence, and an intern should be able to do this quite easily. Possible means you can do it in certain sectors, and in certain other sectors, you might not be able to do it. Evidence might be difficult to get, but you might be able to get it. It will provide certain challenges. And if it is challenging, the chance it's very, very difficult for the intern to be able to collect sufficient evidence. And so we say rather avoid those. If we look at the following slides. So for example, now we're just going through the domains. And if you look at domain 1.1, which deals with participating in a public health campaign, which is promotion of health and wellness, we're saying this is recommended because interns from all sectors will be able to go out to the public and be able to participate in a public health campaign. So that is a recommended one. If you look at 1.2, 1.2 deals with medicine information, that competency standard. And we're saying it is challenging because it's only applicable for active participation in a PTC meeting. So for example, here, the behavioral statement reads, participating in pharmaceutical and therapeutics committee. So what we're saying here is just submitting an attendance register to say, I've attended a PTC meeting is not active participation. The intern has to show that they actually presented something to the PTC. It could be a new drug that needs to be incorporated, or a substitution of a drug because one of the drugs is out of stock or not being made anymore. So what did the intern how did they participate? What did they present to this PTC? So you need a participation letter. You need to submit what you actually presented on. You need to submit the attendance register. So we're saying that it is challenging, and there's more than just one behavioral statement. The next one says participate in an antimicrobial stewardship. Again, here, it's not attending a meeting. How did you participate? What did you do? Behavioral statement C applies principle of palliative care for management of patients with life-limiting conditions. Again, here you have to show active participation. So we're saying that this might be challenging for an intern to do all of these behavioral statements. So before, as a tutor, what we're saying is read the behavioral statements, look at your practice setting, and look at what possible evidence can be got to show that the intern has applied that behavioral statement. Remember, they have to be competent in 75% of the behavioral statements to be competent. So we've gone through this, and you can use it as a resource to look at this. The presentation will be on the website. You can always come to these slides and look at what your intern chose, and then see what the assessors and moderator has rated this particular thing. Another point that I want to bring your focus to is, for example, domain 2.6 deals with pharmacist-initiated therapy. So certain competency standards lends itself to an intern in a certain practice setting. So if you're in a retail or community pharmacy, you will be able to conduct pharmacist-initiated therapy quite easily. But if you're in an institutional pharmacy, public institutional pharmacy, where they just only dispense medication on prescriptions, or in a warehouse environment, or in a manufacturing environment, you're not going to be exposed to pharmacist-initiated therapy. So then 2.6 is not recommended for you. So like that, 3.1 deals with manufacturing in a manufacturing setting in a pharmacy, whereas opposed to 3.5 deals with extemporaneously compounding. So you have to go through these domains, look at these, the decision-making aid, where we've said it's either recommended, challenging, or possible. Look at your practice setting and see whether you do such things. So for example, 1.3.1, domain 3.1 with manufacturing. If you're trying to show manufacturing of a product and there's a lot of behavioral statements there, and if it deals with having to share the SOPs or the recipe for making that particular product, and that's intellectual property for the manufacturing pharmacy, and so therefore you cannot share that as evidence. If you cannot share that as evidence, then don't do that competency standard. Don't do the competency standard and say, I'm not able to do this, or I'm not able to do this, or choose an SOP and say, only the manager is allowed to do this, only the manager is allowed to do this. Choose something where you can show evidence and you are able at an intern level to do that. So if we look at the next slide, again, here we're just looking at the different domains. As I said, domain 3 is only for manufacturing sector, whereas opposed to domain 3.1 is only for a manufacturing sector, and competency 3.5 is extemporaneously compounding products. So have a look at these different domains. Have a look at how we've rated that particular competency standard. Have a look at which practice setting you have. Speak about evidence with your intern before they do the CPD to say, will we be able to get sufficient and enough evidence to show that you applied this particular competency standard? Go to the next slide. Again, here we're showing the last two domains, domain 5 and domain 6. For domain 6, what we're going to say here for 6.3, we say it's possible because it's only applicable to formal training of undergraduate pharmacy students, and it's best suited to academic interns. So it's not suited for informal training that interns do maybe in a retail or community pharmacy or institutional pharmacy. That particular one is 6.2. 6.2 deals with training pharmacist assistants or pharmacists at the workplace. So just make sure before the submission or before the intern even embarks on doing the whole CPD that you consult this matrix and you look at, is it challenging, recommended, or possible, the competency standard that the particular intern has chosen. Next entry. Now you are ready to complete the CPD cycle. So we're going to give you just some broad guidelines in terms of evidences that can be used for a competency standard. And by no means is this an exhaustive list. It's just a guideline to say, these are some of the pieces of evidence you can look. But again, the onus falls on the intern to be able to read those behavioral statements and provide sufficient evidence for 75% of the behavioral statements. So for example, 1.1, which is participating in a public health campaign. Again, we said that is a recommended competency standard for interns. Possible evidence, show how you provided the information in terms of a poster used to promote the health. Evidence could also include the attendance register. Again, as we said, it's not all evidence that's there. You could have annotated photos of you actually actively presenting it to your particular audience. You might have to have reference material in terms of how did you use that reference material in order to develop your poster or your PowerPoint presentation or your pamphlet or whatever it is. Again, this will be made available on the website. So you're going to come back and have a look at these particular domains and see in terms of what have we advised in terms of evidence. And the reason we sharing these slides is because the intern will probably come to you for guidance, and then you can look at this particular thing. And so, for example, if they're attempting to do outcome 2.2, which is patient counseling, then you can see, okay, look, this is a recommended thing. And again, it's specific to your practice setting. If you're in a wholesale setting or in a manufacturing setting and you're not going to be counseling patients, obviously you can't do that. But if you're in a setting where you can do that, then you can have a look at the behavioral statements and you can guide them in terms of think about your counseling plan, think about your patient feedback, and again, read the behavioral statements, and that will guide you in terms of what types of evidences you need. Move on to the next slide. Again, here we're seeing domain 3 and domain 4. Decision making to say whether it's possible or recommended, and in terms of guidelines, which you can then go through by yourself if the intern does choose that particular domain and it does choose that particular competency standard. We can move over to the next one. And then that's the final two domains. And just to reiterate, an intern is allowed to choose a competency standard from each domain, but domain 5.3 is compulsory. So they can't choose 5.1 and 5.2 or 5.4 to 5.8. Domain 5 is the only domain where 5.3, which deals with legal and ethical practice, is compulsory, and every single intern will have to attempt outcome 5.3. So let's look at the guidelines for certain evidences there. The example we gave earlier was also from domain 3. So we must include annotated extracts of the applicable acts, legislations, code of conduct. So again, you can't just submit the whole Pharmacy Act or whole Medicines Act. Submit the parts that is pertinent to your particular activity, highlight that part, annotate. So for example, if you're doing compounding, you'll highlight Regulation 3.1 of the Medicines Act, and you'll say that according to this regulation, any extemporaneously compounded product can only be given an expiry of 30 days. The label needs to say use within 30 days. The next piece of evidence, you will have your label, you will say use within 30 days. You can show your batch manufacturing record. You can show that you've allocated only a 30-day expiry to your product. So annotate that piece of legislation and then show application for it and annotate how you did it. Remember, keeping abreast means current and or recent amended legislation. So keeping abreast doesn't just mean I read this article or I read this board notice. You have to show how you applied that particular board notice within that CPD. Remember, the evidence must be annotated, and there are other behavioral statements there which deals with professional indemnity insurance. You have to have proof that you have professional indemnity insurance. You can't submit evidence to say that you're in the process of applying for indemnity insurance, because that doesn't show that you have indemnity insurance. Okay, and then domain 6, again, you can see that 6.2 is recommended, and you can see that there's guidelines there in terms of basically some basic evidence that you need. And again, I want to stress that if you read this, it won't give you 75% of the evidence needed. It's just pointers or guidelines where you can just point the intern in the right direction. Next slide. Okay, and now we will be doing a poll. I'd like you just to click on that and be able to answer the poll question.
Uh, Thanks, Ibrahim. Natalie, may you please share the results if there's any? Thank you.
Yeah, we're just waiting for the results to populate.
Okay, seemingly there are no responses coming forth. Tutors, there is a question there, which says, which common challenges have you experienced in your role as an intern tutor? We're requesting you just to post some of the challenges that you have experienced so that we can move on with our presentation. So this is an activity for you, just for us to have an idea of what you are experiencing. Thank you. So please feel free to complete the poll and submit. Thank you.
I think let's move on to the next slide. Maybe we'll deal with this poll a little bit later.
Ibrahim, can you see my slide?
I can't see it. Yeah. Can we move on to the next one past the poll?
Okay, I'm going to do that for you.
Okay. In the next slide, we're just discussing challenges that
Hello, Ibrahim. We can't hear you.
in 2025.
Okay.
We invite. Hear me now? Can you hear? Hello?
Yes, you may continue.
Yes.
Thank you.
So in our last Lekotla meeting, we invited some tutors from various provinces and we asked them to reach out to their interns, not just in their facility, throughout the province, and gather some challenges that the interns were facing and challenges that the tutors were facing with a particular portfolio of evidence and submission of portfolio evidence. And these are some of the issues that were highlighted. So in terms of intern challenges, dealing with core competency development, the tutors found that the interns lacked planning capabilities, uh, non-independent thinking, lack of independent learning ability, lack of comprehensive analysis capability, insufficient preparation. So basically, the interns, most of them lacked critical thinking capabilities. With regards to their skills, communication was a problem between tutors and interns at times. The ability to adapt, creativity, ability to work within a team, transparency in terms of sharing feedback with the tutors, and interns also struggled with time management. In terms of attitude, it was found that interns lacked the enthusiasm and initiative. They had no sense of responsibility in terms of submission of these portfolio of evidences. They lacked passion. Some of them were generally unhappy, had low morale, and also tutors noted that there were mental issues that they were on the rise within the intern population. With regards to challenges that for tutors, uh, um, lack of a teaching plan, where a lot of tutors waited for the interns to bring their work to them rather than structure something and help the interns by having a teaching plan. Assessment versus compliance submission, where the intern where the intern just experiences that the tutor just submits the CPD or the portfolio of evidence for the intern, but doesn't really lacks the skill to be able to assess that against the assessment criteria and against the behavioral statements. So it was more for compliance exercise to say to submit in terms of the intern's behalf without really helping them by assessing those particular portfolio of evidence entries. Then there was the issue of limited time allocated for verification. So if you look at the deadlines, and if you stick to the deadlines, there is very little time. So for example, the intern deadline to submit to the tutor might be the 1st of February, and then the deadline for the tutor to submit on behalf of the intern might be the 3rd of February. So sometimes there's 3 days or 3 to 5 days, and tutors found that it's a very short time period for them to be able to ask the intern to correct something, for the intern to go then and correct it and be able to resubmit it within that time, and then to be able to reassess it, and then to be able to submit it on behalf of the intern. And so the advice given here is that the deadlines are there, and we know that those deadlines are there for a purpose. And there's a reason why those deadlines are a few days, because the intern has to submit, the tutor has to submit, the assessor has to assess, the moderator has to moderate, and then pharmacy council also has to release the results, all within a monthly cycle. Because if you look at the particular deadlines, you'll find that there's deadlines for every month, and that was created to be able to help the intern to submit more regularly. So if you're not yet competent, you don't have to wait 3 months for the next deadline. You can submit again. So having said that, the intern and the tutor can formulate their own deadlines. That's independent of this deadline too. So if the deadline for the intern is on the 1st of February, you can make your own deadline the 20th of January or the 25th of January and say, look, can I have a look at this before this so we can sort all of these out? So when these hard deadlines come about, we will be able to submit according to those deadlines. So interns and tutors are welcome to formulate their own deadlines before the actual deadlines, but have to be able to submit within the deadlines stipulated by Pharmacy Council in the intern assessment manual. There's a non-standardized approach to CPDs. Again, here, because the portfolio of evidence is so vast, it's very difficult to supply a checklist of evidence and do this activity or that activity. So an intern can do basically any activity that they can show that they applied and those behavioral statements and apply the particular legislation. So again, tutors may have it's a bit of an issue in terms of the intern could submit anything. So there's no standardized approach to portfolio of evidence submission with regards to interns. The limited tutor support, no defined support system. Some interns complained that they did not get much support from their tutors, and so therefore they had to do a lot of the work by themselves. The disconnect between learning and practical work. So again, there's theory and then there's practice. And in certain work environments, there was a bit of a disconnect between what was learned or what is in the legislation versus what is practiced out there, which then presents difficulties for the intern. Again, the tutor challenges, the lack of time and workload. Tutoring the intern is not the only work that a tutor does at the practice setting. So the workload is high and there's lack of time. Tutors also says no incentives, and augmented by the fact that if an intern submits something that's unprofessional or unethical, there could be disciplinary inquiries. And because the tutor submitted on behalf of the intern, the tutor is also part of the whole process. Malicious compliance, interns are just looking at these portfolio of evidence as a hurdle. They're not giving much attention to it, and then therefore not submitting portfolio of evidence with much substance. And then the tutor has to work overtime in trying to assist this intern to be able to get a portfolio of evidence of value. Sometimes tutors and interns are incongruent. We all have different personalities, communication styles, and ways of doing things. And sometimes a tutor and intern just don't gel. It doesn't leave for a very positive experience. So we just wanted to highlight to all the tutors today some of the challenges that were highlighted by the interns and tutors in our last meeting. Process challenges, issues with systems having downtime. I think that has been sorted out this year. There's a better timetable in terms of when things are done, but also to give you to make you understand that if all interns decide to submit 2 or 3 hours before deadline date, the amount of interns that go onto the website and working on the system at a particular time causes that system to crash. So if interns are submitting more regularly and not all bunching up to do it on the last day or the last couple of hours, there will be less system downtime. Delinking of the tutor and the intern profiles and renewals of training accreditation. Sometimes, for some reason, the tutor and the intern are getting delinked and you're not able to submit on behalf of the intern, or your facility training certificate has expired, and so therefore pharmacy inspection has to be done, and a new training certificate has to be awarded, and that could delay the whole process. Exclusion of the tutor on the feedback process. So again, the feedback is given to the intern, and then the intern is supposed to come back to the tutor and be able to share that feedback so that the tutor knows why that assessment was not yet competent. And a lot of the tutors said that the interns were not coming back with that feedback. So the tutor was in the dark in terms of why was that submission not yet competent and what are the changes that needed to be made. So there needs to be better communication between the tutor and the intern with regard to the feedback that the intern has got with regard to their portfolio of evidence submission. There's no access of the learner to the marks by the tutor, only outcomes. So again, here it's the same thing. The tutor is not aware of whether it was partially complied or complied, it's just not yet competent, and then the intern has to share what the mark was and what the feedback was. Again, the last part says the part section view of the CPD. Parts are viewed in different screens, and what they mean by this is that the reflection is in one screen, then you move over to the planning, and then you move over to the implementation, and the evidence is attached to the implementation and the evaluation. But this is not only for tutors. It's how the system is set up. It's how the intern submits. It's how the tutor reads it. It's how the assessor also and the moderator reads it. Each section is on a standalone, and so you're not able to see all sections together. And sometimes you might have to toggle back to see, did you include this resource in the planning? Did you now include it in your implementation? Is it part of your evidence? But that is for all stakeholders. It's exactly the same. The way the system is set up, that you do each section and then you move on to the next section. With regards to the owners and employers having access to monitor the interns' progress on the SAPC website, these access rights may also be delegated. So you'll see in larger group pharmacies or whatever it is, where they want to track how interns are doing in the particular hospitals or community pharmacies. You, as the owner or employer, you can go in and you can check the progress. And that particular function can also be delegated to, that rights can also be delegated to other pharmacists who might be overseeing many interns within a group. Next. Okay, so the challenge identified by some of the tutors, the tutor challenges being made to check portfolio of evidence with limited time, which we discussed there, given multiple portfolio to assess at once. So an intern will submit no portfolio of evidence for the first 3 months, and then in month 4, just before the exam, they'll submit 5 portfolio of evidence entries, which they expect the tutor to be able to go over in 3 days, give feedback, and be able to submit on their behalf. So the tutors are not given enough time to go over and make reasonable inputs in terms of these portfolios of evidence. So please encourage your interns to be able to submit regularly and submit an assessment at a time. And again, it's a communication between the intern and the tutor to say, what is the workload of the tutor, what is the workload of the intern, how can you be able to go through these portfolios of the evidence meaningfully, give feedback, let the intern make corrections, and still be able to make those deadlines. Those are issues that need to be discussed between the intern and the tutor. The intern work attendance versus the portfolio time management. Uh, yes, interns are working and they have a whole lot of things to do, but the interns must be able to manage their time effectively to still be able to do this portfolio. So the intern has to have time management skills in terms of when I'm doing this portfolio and still be able to do the work that they are supposed to do as an intern at the practice setting. The interns are not open and vocal with their tutor, so they don't bring the results to the tutor or share the feedback as stated before. Or if they have challenges, maybe they don't bring it to the attention of the tutor, so the tutor is unaware and not sure how to help this particular intern. Lack of communication with portfolios that have been returned and need to be re-signed and reassessed. Again, there's a feedback issue that we spoke about earlier, where you share the assessor comments and you ask the tutor to be able to help you to understand those assessor comments if you don't understand it, or to be able to go back and try to see what was said. But again, it needs to be shared with the tutor for the tutor to be aware of it. Intern rather do their portfolios on their own and get checked later. So they don't include the tutor in the step-by-step process in doing it, so that when a mistake is made or something is done, it can be corrected at source. The whole portfolio of evidence is done and then submitted to the tutor, and it's very difficult to be able to make those changes once the activity has been done. So the intern needs to regularly speak with the tutor and involve the tutor in every step of that portfolio of evidence activity, so that changes can be made sooner rather than later. Intern challenges: interns are not clear on how to start, and they're afraid maybe to ask their tutor in terms of how to start. And the interns do not meet up together to share their wins and setbacks. Uh, this is a double-edged sword. Sometimes interns interact too much with each other and copying each other's submissions, while others interns isolate themselves and go it alone. And so therefore, they don't get that peer review in terms of other interns to see what they're doing and what feedback they have. We'll be able to assist them in terms of guiding them in terms of what is the standard needed with regards to the portfolio of evidence submission. Next slide. Okay, so the tutor verification process is done online. When the intern submits the entry to you, you will then evaluate the entire CBD entry. Please make sure that all elements of authentication are present. That you're checking that each cycle of the CBD, you have a look at the evidence as well. There's many times when the intern has submitted evidence and has clicked on the wrong PDF. So sometimes they're clicking on their bank statements, or they're clicking on some other kind of evidence that deals nothing with the portfolio of evidence. So in terms of wasting that CPD or the portfolio of evidence submission, have a look at the evidence, have a look that it is the current evidence for the current activity. If it is a resubmission, it's not the old evidence that they're submitting again with the new entry. So evaluate and make sure that all elements of authentication are present. Most important is to verify online upon completion by the intern. And remember, again, you can accept and release it to Pharmacy Council if you're happy with the entry. If you are not happy with the entry, if it's unprofessional, unethical, or whatever reason, if you submit on the intern's behalf, you are part of that submission. So if you're not happy with that submission, suggest how to improve the CBD and send it back to the intern, especially if there's issues of plagiarism or breach of patient confidentiality. Always check the quality, interact, guide the intern to see how they can improve the CPD entry. Remember, earlier on, we mentioned the mentor, coaching, role model value you can add. When you verifying the particular entry, you can help the intern by providing all of these expertise. Next. Okay, that's another poll for the attendance.
Thank you, Hussein. So this brings us to the end of the first presentation. We are a little bit behind with time. So let's take 5 minutes break and then we come back at 11:30 so that we can take care of the remaining part of the workshop. So there will be a short presentation and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions or clarity. And please also note that we have shared the poll and the link on chat, and you are kindly requested to give us the challenges that you are experiencing because that information is assisting us as the office in terms of knowing how can we support you. So we'll appreciate if you can just go to that link and then provide that information. Thank you. See you at 11:30. Thank you. Good morning once again, tutors. So we are going to do the last part of this workshop. That's the second presentation. So this presentation is basically targeting the new tutors who are tutoring interns for the first time. So in my screen, I'm showing the performance of interns, that is the statistics over the 2 years, 2024 and 2025, which is showing us how interns performed over those years. So in 2024, we had 80% interns who were successful in the portfolio of evidence in January. And then in 2025, we're having 84% of interns who are successful. So there is a slight improvement of 4%. And for that, we want to thank you, tutors, for all your hard works. We are really seeing that you're doing whatever you can to assist the interns to be successful in 6 portfolio of evidence entries as required. So plagiarism detection system for intern portfolio of evidence entries. This has been introduced last year. That's why I was saying my presentation is basically targeting new tutors. So each portfolio of evidence entry submitted by intern will be subjected to plagiarism detection prior to submission for tutor verification. And the system will check for similarity between portfolio of evidence entries submitted by current interns against the existing database of portfolio of evidence entries submitted by current and past interns. So this database is the South African Pharmacy Council database. Tutors have view-only access to report without the ability to modify or exclude matches. So once an entry has been submitted for similarity check, when an intern is submitting that entry for verification by the tutor will also have an opportunity to see the similarity report, but unfortunately the tutor has got no right to make any changes on that report. That's why we're saying they're having only viewing rights. And then this is the process for submission of portfolio of evidence entry for plagiarism detection. So this is the process that the interns are following when they're submitting their entries for similarity check. We just included this so that in case the interns are struggling, you are in a position to assist them. So after the intern has completed the first step of a CPD, meaning after they have recorded their activity on the SAPC secure site, then the entry, I mean, at the evaluation step, which is the last step, the system will request them to save and submit for similarity check. And then after doing that, the system will further request them to accept 10-8 EULA. And then once they have, they have to accept, because if they click no, it will take them back to acceptance of Turnitin in EULA. So once they agree or they select yes, then the system will then say submit for similarity check. And this is where the intern will be able to submit, and then there will be another message to confirm the submission, and then the system will generate a report. So there will be a communication to say the report will be available after how long, depending on how busy the system is at that time. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it can be available immediately. And then the intern, will then review the report, And if the similarity score is above 20%, unfortunately, for the CPD to have, or the portfolio of evidence to have a similarity score of 20% and above, the intern won't be successful in that entry. Then to correct that, they must just go back and they have to accept to rework their entry and submit again just to lower the score. And then if they feel everything is okay and they are confident that they didn't copy anybody's work, they can submit, accept the report and submit for tutor verification. That's where you are coming in. You'll have an opportunity to go through the report and see if indeed the intern didn't plagiarize. Sometimes you might find that the score is high because of the commonly used terms like GPP, SAPC, which might make the score high. That's why I'm saying if the intern is confident that they didn't plagiarize and there's nothing for them to change, let them submit, and then as the tutor, you will verify. So that's how the process is designed. And remember, the maximum acceptable similarity score is 20%. So here we are just going to navigate the CPD dashboard to take the new assessor tutors through. So once you have logged in on your secure site and you are on CPD dashboard, remember, for you to access this, you should have done your annual declaration. So make sure that if you haven't declared yet, make sure that you do your annual declaration. Otherwise, the system won't permit you to move on with doing the verification of CPDs. So when you are on this page, you will see there is verification. That's where you must click. And then once you have selected verification, you will be able to see the P number of your intern and a message indicating how many entries are waiting for you to verify. And then you just click on the view that is shown there in green. And then once you have clicked the view, you will be able to see here are the 2 entries that were submitted, which need you to verify. And then you're going to continue again by clicking view for the first entry. And then you will also do the same for the second entry once you are done with the verification of the first. So once you have clicked view, then it will take you to the page where the intern has made a submission. And then the pages are separated. So on this page, we see is the first step of the CPD, that is the reflection. And here you will be able to see this is what is in bold, is what the intern has submitted. And then on the right-hand side, you will see there is assessment criteria. So this is the criteria that assessors and moderators are using when they assess the intern portfolio of evidence. So make sure that you check the criteria and compare with what the intern has written. So if you feel some of the requirements under the criteria are not addressed, please advise the intern accordingly so that they can correct and make a new submission. So we will be following the same process for all the 4 steps. This is planning. The assessment criteria is also there. So that is what will guide you when you look at what the intern has submitted. And then when we go to the 3rd step, that is the implementation. The intern will provide their description there. And then it is on this step again where interns are expected to upload their evidence. So where is written document, that is the evidence that the intern has uploaded. Just click there and then you'll be able to see the evidence, and just make sure that everything that has been said under the description of the implementation step has been covered by the evidence. And then from there, when you are happy with the evidence or when you're done, then you move on to the last step, that is the evaluation. So here the intern will also provide the description. The assessment criteria is also there. You will just check and advise accordingly. In case you are happy with what the intern has provided, then you're going to click on View Plagiarism Report. So this will bring the report for you to check the similarity score. If it's above 20, then you need to advise the intern accordingly. And then in case you have viewed the report, you're done, and you feel that the entry is not yet ready for submission or assessment, then you can return it to the intern by clicking on this tab. And then you will then be able to advise the interns on the areas that they need to rectify. And then in case you are happy with the description, the evidence, the plagiarism report, then you just click submit for assessment. So here it will then go to the assessor to assess the entry. After you have clicked the assessment tab, you won't be able to see the entry. Even the intern won't have access to that entry. So here I'm just showing how to access the report. So when you have clicked the View Report tab here, it will take you to this window, which is showing you the matches. In this case, it's only 2%. And then if you want to see the report in details, you click on Open PDF Report, and that will give you the report. And then this is how the report will look like. So areas that have been detected as being similar to entries submitted before, they will be highlighted in blue like it is. This is the first one, and then there will be the second one. It's just that I couldn't put the whole report here, but that's how you will see the sections that are selected as being similar to the other submissions. And then, okay, I touched on this. Right, and then when you are done, this is how the portal will look like. After you have verified, it will show the date on which the entry was verified, and this view tab will disappear once you have verified the entry. So it won't be there. That's why I'm saying you won't have access to the entry anymore, because this tab won't be there any longer. I think that's all I have with regard to the portal. And then here, I just wanted to say, please make sure that you assist the intern with regards to the deadlines. These are very much important. And like my colleagues have emphasized, I can't say anything more, but please make sure that the interns take note of this, and you and the intern have your own deadlines, which will be uh, designed in such a way that it allows the intern to submit on time. And then I think that's all I wanted to share with you. And then the QR code is there for us to complete the poll. Please help us to do that. It has been shared on chat. It is very much important that we hear from you. Like I said, the intention is for us to know how best we can assist you. And then there is also an attendance register or survey, and please complete it because we need that as proof of attendance. And this will also be shared on chat. And then the other important message that I want to share with you is just to remind you that we are hosting the 4th National Pharmacy Conference, and it will be held on 11 to 13 October 2026 at Nkosi Albert Lithuli International Convention Center Complex, which is commonly known as Durban ICC. And then there is the theme there, it glimpse into the future, advancing pharmacy towards 2050. That is the theme. And then there is early bird registration, which closes on 31st May 2026. So please go into our website. You will find more information about this conference, and we're encouraging you to register and be part of this life-changing conference. And then thank you so much. Now we will move on to the question and answer session. Thanks. Over to you, Net.
Thanks, Tabang. There aren't any questions at the moment. Attendees are asked to please type their questions in the Q&A section on Teams. And if you're joining us on YouTube, please type your questions in the comment section. We will read them out. Tabang, in the meantime, here are the results of the poll from earlier.
Oh, yes, please share. Thank you, Net. I'm not seeing your screen, Natalie. Are you sharing?
Yes, I am. And my colleagues have confirmed they can see my screen, Tabang.
Okay, thank you. I can see now. Okay, so far we have received from 6 tutors. Thank you so much for responding. And we encouraging other tutors to do the same. So I can see time management or time is always a challenge. Also a different interpretation of the requirements. And we hope this workshop has clarified some of the things. So intern submitting late is still a challenge because this put in tutors under pressure. So let's encourage them to do it on time. If possible, develop a schedule with them so that there will be something that is directing them. And Ibrahim, Veni, do you want to say anything about other comments that have been shared?
Thanks, Tabang. I just wanted you to elaborate on the comments. So how are we dealing with that in terms of tutors seeing the comments? So the suggestion there was that the intern prints it out. Is that the only way that they are able to access it? Am I right?
Yeah, so from the office, we made it to be in that manner. So to encourage communication between the intern and the tutor. So it's like we wanted the intern to take responsibility, to share their comments with the intern so that they can have that discussion on how to approach the entry, what to rectify, and yeah, things like that. Thank you. Okay, I'm noting that there is also an issue with our system being slow sometimes. It is noted. We will raise it with our IT department.
Abang, there's a question. I'm unsure why evaluation section must be written in future tense if you need to describe what you have learned in the, which would be past tense.
Okay, thanks, Nat. Veni, Ibrahim, I think you can
Yes.
respond to that.
Yes. When we look at evaluation, uh, only one part of it speaks about a future learning need. So there are different aspects with regards to the evaluation text that we look at, and only the last part says you must identify a future learning need. So the rest of it is written as though of the skills learned or of the how you practice the skill with an example. So all of those things there will be written in the past. It's not something that you want to do, but your future learning need, we'll see. And again, when we speak about a cyclical activity, which is a CPD, what we're trying to say is that particular future learning need closes a cycle. So what we're saying is in the process of learning something, while you're doing it, you in that process, you might learn something else and say, okay, you know what, in my next CPD, maybe I need to do this. This is something else that I need to learn. So that's the only part that will say in the future, I would like to learn this or learn more about this. So the rest of it is written in the past tense, acknowledging what you learned and how you practice it and the impact that it made on your practice. Thank you.
We are still having 8 minutes to go. So tutors, please feel free to submit your questions and also to share your challenges. So I can see number 5 there. She's saying, or he, so far I have been very fortunate to not have experienced major issues with my interns. Collaborative work from the start is key. If the intern takes responsibility for their work, it makes the tutor's work easier and enjoyable. So thank you for that comment. At least it's not really that bad for some of us. And I love the advice you're giving to other tutors to say there should be collaborative work and, from the start. So there's no time to waste and wait for the last minutes. Must start immediately when the intern reports to work. And we are having a new tutor there saying this is my first time having an intern to tutor, so I am unable to provide common challenges as yet. There's no problem. You will just learn from what others have provided. And we're wishing you all the best. Hopefully you will have a good experience. Thank you. So in the absence of uh, any question, or should we wait? Maybe let's wait up to 57. Then we will allow Ms. Pongo to do the closing remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Our tutors that took their time to be part of the session. I wouldn't wish the office to hold you here for any longer. I would just like to convey a message of gratitude for the attendance and honoring this request to be part of the exciting journey for the cohort of interns in 2026. And thanking you for the time and staying until the session is over. Just to say that there is, when you were sent an invite, another day for those that would not have been able to attend today, or those that would still want to come in and grab, another information or two that can assist them in this journey. And just to round it off, to say you are really contributing to the education and training, which yields, pharmacists like yourself that hopefully will also be able to give back. So thanking you a lot. Have yourself a wonderful afternoon further from the Office of the Registrar. Thank you. Thank you to the wonderful team as well that prepared the session and the facilitators who have the necessary expertise to make this a success. Good afternoon. Thank you.